Vice President J.D. Vance there, flanked by ICE agents, visiting the Twin Cities, hoping to bring down the temperature, as he just said, amid nearly 2 weeks of unrest there. For more, let's bring in our Matt Rivers, who's been in Minneapolis covering the story, Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas, also our contributors, former NYPD Chief of Detectives Bob Boyce and former FBI agent Richard Frankel. All right, Matt, you were right there in the room. You were listening to the Vice President. You heard the questions from various reporters. Highlights for you.
Yeah, I think it's striking that the tone he's taking appears to be more conciliatory, I would venture to say, than we've heard from the Trump administration in the past, even just after the Renee Good shooting just a few weeks ago. The question I was able to get to the vice president was, in the days after the Renee Good shooting, it seemed that the administration was suggesting that there was near immunity for all ICE officers. And yet what we're hearing today, he spoke just now, talking about the ability to potentially take disciplinary action against ICE officers when the situation merits it. And so I asked him, is that a change of tone? Is that a change of policy? Now, he said it wasn't. He thinks that there's always reason to investigate certain officers when there is reason to do so. But I think safe to say that for an administration, Kira, that is so known for doubling down, for not apologizing, for not giving an inch, for better or for worse, here we're just, how he ended the press conference right now, saying he wants to meet people here halfway, and he's urging local law enforcement to help federal law enforcement, which is certainly something that we have not seen here on the ground before.
And that was my follow-up question to you, Matt, is you heard, and I'm looking at the various quotes here from the vice president, that he wants people to be able to protest peacefully, that there are things we can all do better, that he just wants state and local officials to cooperate with them. And yes, that all sounds great, but at the same time, you have the U.S. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche saying, we're not going to investigate the death of Renee Good, that there is no investigation, that we're moving on from that. But clearly, you hear J.D. Vance saying it's protesters that are assaulting officers, yet no mention of officers and where they've gone to the extreme of how they've treated protesters.
Right, and that's a good point, Kira, to the other side of that. He was talking about protesters, he was talking about far left-wing agitators making the situation worse, going after ICE officers, but what you didn't hear him talk about was a lot of the things that we've seen with our own eyes, which does appear to be ICE overreach, going into homes that they shouldn't have been in, excessive force against even U.S. citizens. What role do ICE officers, do DHS officials have in the ongoing chaos here in Minneapolis? There is no question that there is a role that ICE has played in contributing to that across the city. And I think that's where critics of the vice president would hear what he's saying, look, sure, are there some protesters that have taken it too far sometimes? Yes, I think by most reasonable standards, that's probably the case. On the other hand, you're also going to get plenty of people who say, what about ICE? They're taking it way too far, masked up the entire time.
Right, as we're seeing video here of Mr. Tao, a member of the Hmong community that has received a lot of attention because it was all captured on video there, a U.S. citizen who was taken in for no apparent reason, and it gained a lot of attention. All right, Pierre Thomas, let's go to you, our Chief Justice Correspondent. Your thoughts after hearing from the Vice President there in Minneapolis?
Well, Kira, I think, it's interesting, and as Matt pointed out, he was calling for more cooperation. And I think when we spoke about this story about a week ago, we talked about the notion that all these parties, state, federal, and local officials, need to improve their communication to see if they can lower the temperature. Right now, the community in Minnesota, particularly in Minneapolis, the community is caught between tension between the federal government and local officials. What the vice president did not mention is that the governor, the attorney general of the state, and the mayor of Minneapolis are also facing criminal investigation by the Justice Department. Many would say that's not exactly cooperation. So the point there being that there's real tension and is having practical and direct impacts on what's happening on the ground, because in some ways the people are responding to what they're hearing and what they're seeing. And I think the key going forward here will be two things. The massive deportation program that the administration is administering is not going to stop, period, full stop. The question is, can state and local officials figure out a way to work around this policy that the administration is committed to and has no intention of changing.
And it's interesting, when I talked to the police chief of Minneapolis, Brian O'Hara, yesterday, he said, yes, there is a world in which we can all work together. But Bob and Brad, I'm going to take this question to you. How do you do that when already you're having this conversation of a judge's warrant versus an administrative warrant? And then you have the vice president there saying, look, we can enforce immigration law through administrative warrants. I think it didn't even really seem that he was really deeply well versed on what exactly the immigration law says and how they're able to enforce that compared to what they are actually doing there on the street. So from a let's take you, Bob, with the local perspective here from what you just heard. Is there a way that local, state, and the feds can all work together here, or does it look like the administration is just going to do what they're going to do and local and state are going to have to try and figure this out?
It appears to be, Kara, a reach out by Vice President Vance that he wants the help of local police when these protesters come. And that happens everywhere else in the country, but Minnesota is what he's saying. I will tell you in New York, and he cited Texas as well, is that, and I worked with Rich many times, his office is right across the street from mine, basically. If something happened, if there was a protest, something, you don't want to keep the two sides right at each other. You want to insert local police to keep everybody safe. And that's not happening in Minnesota, and it hasn't happened from day one. We've been talking about this for a couple of weeks now. The Whipple building and other places as well. That's what it seemed to me what he's talking about. And another thing, going into these administrative warrants versus judicial warrants, and there's a big difference there, big divide. It looks like they're hitting old doors. What does that mean? They're hitting a door that they think someone lived there one time, and they don't know where he is right now, so they're going to go knock on the door and see if he's there. That warrant, that administrative warrant, is written by DHI. It's not written by a judge. A judicial warrant is something wholly different, where you could take a door if you have to on a search warrant or arrest warrant, either one. So that's what he's talking about there. You would rather have a judicial warrant when you hit a door, but the information is bad because it's old info. He's looking to get into databases in the city so they can look more properly and more effectively into these doors. Again, across the country, New York City Police Department, Foley Square, they're there just about every day for protests against ICE. And it's not been like this at all. It's only been like this in Minnesota. And I don't know if it's going to change or not. Hopefully it does. He wants to lower the temperature. That's great. And this may be a way forward, but it has to happen.
All right. Rich Frankel, your former FBI, your thoughts from a federal level.
So I agree wholeheartedly with Bob on this. You know, when we went into some of our situations, and we're dealing with locals, we always brought NYPD. You want the uniform presence. You want to make sure that people know that it is a law enforcement action, that we're all working together to make sure that we arrest the people that we're aiming to arrest, and we're trying to do it as safe as possible so that no law enforcement is injured, but also no innocent victims are injured, and also any suspects are not injured. You all want to go home safely. If you go home safely, it's a good day. As far as the administrative warrant versus a search warrant versus an arrest warrant, I think there is confusion on this. When we went out and did arrests with arrest warrants or with search warrants, they are judicially signed. We don't operate under the administrative warrant in the FBI. Just because the ICE, HSI, and DHS operates under an administrative deportation order, I don't think gives them the right to enter into a house under an administrative subpoena or an administrative warrant. I think that does have to get fleshed out by the courts and determined whether that is something that is legal. Again, I don't think it is, but I think it's something that is definitely a question for the courts.